This podcast is intended as healthcare practitioner education only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
I know that the hypothalamus is considered the master gland, I guess, but I like to call the thyroid the conductor of the hormonal orchestra because it is the traffic controller.
I'd probably explain it as a butterfly-shaped gland that sits in your neck and is really responsible for the energy production of pretty much every single cell in your body.
It's daily. And most of my patients, I would say 95% of my patients, I'm at some point thinking, is there something thyroid going on here? Is there something thyroid?
This is Bioconcepts Between Clinical Minds, the podcast that's open-minded enough to take in all sides of a clinical story. You'll hear from researchers, doctors, naturopaths, nutritionists and patients. We look at common clinical presentations through a different lens. It's open, frank and sometimes controversial. Nothing is off limits. Will it change the way you treat? We'll leave that up to you. In Season 3 of Bioconcepts Between Clinical Minds, we look at thyroid health. We talk to experts in the field who will take you into their clinics and share their experience. I'm Tony Chambers, and this is Bioconcepts Between Clinical Minds. In this episode of Between Clinical Minds, we go back to the basics of thyroid health and dysfunction with acupuncturist and naturopath Dr Miranda Myles, functional medicine practitioner Alexandra Brewster, and holistic dietitian Natalie K. Thyroid health is a major area of practice for all natural medicine practitioners as it influences every aspect of health and is itself influenced by all body systems. In this first episode, we cover thyroid basics with 3 practitioners who help patients with their thyroids on a daily basis. Natalie K. Douglas is an holistic dietitian, nutritionist and naturopath.
It seems so simple, but it's such an important organ that touches so many areas of the body. But I guess for those that do want to take it back to Thyroid 101, I'd probably explain it as a butterfly-shaped gland that sits in your neck and is really responsible for the energy production of pretty much every single cell in your body. And because of that, it does influence how so many different areas of our health actually work and function. And I often think of it as a bit of the canary in the coal mine, if you will.
How can we understand what's happening for our patients walking through the door? Like, what do you first do and look out for?
I guess initially I am very much looking for some of those classic hypo or hyperthyroid symptoms. And what we're really looking for here is a collection. So as many practitioners that are listening will know, some of those, particularly those hypothyroid symptoms, can be really non-specific. So things like fatigue, brain fog, maybe some cold hands and feet, some issues with menstrual cycles, whether there's some constipation going on, issues with weight loss or weight gain. It's one of those things where it's really easy for so many of us to be like, oh yeah, I have 1 or 3 of those, so do now I have a thyroid issue? But what I always tell practitioners is that we're looking for collections of symptoms together. So not just 1 or 2 of those, but really like 3 and upwards that are starting to form a little bit of a picture. And then I think that it's about actually going in and investigating the thyroid function itself, but keeping very much in the back of your mind that it's actually quite rare that it's the thyroid gland itself, in terms of that actual machinery of the thyroid gland, that is the problem. That's not to say there aren't thyroid issues as how we would think of them going on, but not to think that it's always just a problem with that machinery, but really zooming back out and perhaps learning about a bit more of a holistic picture of that as well.
And actually, one of my next questions was going to be those classic kind of hypothyroid or hyperthyroid symptoms and how, I guess, useful they are, or whether you look for other things. But it sounds like you look for a collection, so more than 3 of those in the one patient.
Yeah, that's my general rule of thumb. And also, when I'm thinking about this is this a thyroid issue, I'm also thinking in the back of my mind of risk factors or triggers. So a classic one that comes to mind is the 3 Ps. So puberty, pregnancy, perimenopause, like times of hormonal change, knowing that, hey, that's a really common time that thyroid issues can present in, particularly our female clients. And also thinking about other triggers that might, I guess, happen just before we actually get a thyroid issue developing. And there's lots and lots of them. But again, some that come to mind for me are, someone having gone through a really stressful event. And I know we're in this season of life where we've just all navigated through a pandemic. And I think that's relevant. And I do think we're going to see more thyroid issues pop up for the stress reasons, but also knowing that viruses can also be a trigger. And it's not exclusive to COVID or SARS related viruses, but any virus. So viral triggers, stress in all senses of the word. And also if there has been, times of hormonal change, there are more, but they're some of the most frequent ones that I would see.
And what proportion of your patients would present with hypo versus hyperthyroidism?
I would probably say around 70 to 80% hypo and around 20 to 30% hyper. I do think that hypo in my clinic is much more common. I also, and this may just be my own theory here coming out, but I also think people, particularly women who thyroid issues are more common in, take longer to reach out when they have a hyperthyroid versus a hypothyroid, because as sad as it is, I think that sometimes some of the weight loss that happens with an overactive thyroid and that kind of tired but wired feeling, I think a lot of women sadly just invite whatever weight loss is coming and see that as, oh, well, I'm, this is kind of good and I can handle the other symptoms, so I'm not going to reach out yet. And I know that because patients have told me that in their own words. But then also because like hypothyroidism, some of the hyper symptoms can just be so non-specific and so easily attributed to, oh, I'm just stressed, I'm just a busy mom, I have a lot on my mind, so maybe that's why I'm wired and tired, if you know what I mean.
Dr Miranda Myles is an acupuncturist and naturopath specialising in fertility and female and male reproductive health. She says thyroid issues are very common amongst her patient population, but she doesn't test everyone.
I'd want to see a symptom picture first. I'd want to see at least 3 symptoms that sort of pointed me to that direction or that line of questioning. Otherwise, I think you're at risk of the patient kind of going, oh, this is not making any sense to me. It doesn't resonate with me at all. So even if it is the generalized constant fatigue and hair thinning or drying or constipation or cold hands and feet or unexplained weight gain, so those typical things, that's where I'll question a little bit more deeply. If it is the early pregnancy loss scenario, then it's have your thyroid antibodies been checked. It's that simple. It's going straight into, well, has this been looked at? Because I want that ruled out straight away. Yeah.
So when you're ordering thyroid function tests, are you ordering the whole gamut? So antibodies, the whole lot?
So what I want done is TSH, T3, T4, reverse T3, thyroid antibodies. And if we're suspecting Graves, then I want TSI thrown in there as well. Graves is not as common. I don't see Graves as commonly as I do Hashimoto's or that subclinical underactive. But yes, I want to, if we're going to test and if they're going to pay privately for testing, then I want it done completely and properly. So often, like I had a patient yesterday and her TSH was at 1.14, her T4 was at 18.3, her T3 was at 6, and I'm looking at that going, oh my goodness, most perfect thyroid. Like, it's great when you look at that thyroid picture. However, as we scroll down the rest of the results, the reverse T3 is at 504, and her thyroid antibodies, her TPO was at 1300, and her thyroglobulin was at 48 and should be 104 and should be below 4.5. So, you know, you can do that basic pathology testing. You can, and her thyroid is perfect, right? Her absolute thyroid results were spot on, exactly where I want them. But then, if those antibodies hadn't been done, or if the reverse T3 hadn't been done, we would still be searching for more answers. And that's the frustrating element, when you get this half of the results, and then you're sitting there going, but this looks like something thyroidy, typically thyroidy. And once we found that, it was like, okay, there it is. Like, you couldn't have, her antibodies were just through the roof.
And usually, if that person had gone to the doctor, they would have only potentially got TSH, if she was lucky, T3, T4. So the reverse T3 and the antibodies wouldn't have been done, but there was the solution there, or there was the issue there.
There was the issue, yeah. So whether that's the root cause of the whole situation, obviously with thyroid antibodies it's not, but there is the pathology, the confronting pathology was right there. And this is a patient that had an early pregnancy loss in December. So again, you sort of look at it and go, well, were those antibodies there then? Don't know. Did those antibodies elevate because of the pregnancy loss? Don't know. Can't answer those questions. What we know is that is there now, and if she's going to try again, then I would really prefer those antibodies were down.
Definitely.
Prior to her trying again.
Alexandra Brewster is a certified functional medicine practitioner, naturopath, and registered nurse. She agrees that testing only TSH as a first step is flawed.
So basically, in functional medicine, they say the TSH is the last thing to go. So the first thing we should all be testing is antibodies. So basically, it's because if they test TSH and that's high, that means the thyroid is pretty much at its last legs.
You were saying before that the first thing that we should actually be looking at are the antibodies. Why is that?
It just seems to be the first aberration they see. And, you know, when it's simmering, like I always say, the body whispers, Tony, check your antibodies. And by the time it's TSH, it's screaming at you, bloody do something, I'm about to die here. You know, so it seems to be the first thing that goes. Unless you have a polymorphism sitting on your vitamin A conversion, you can't convert beta carotene to retinol. And we know retinol is very important to convert that T4 to T3. So that can, you know, there's it's like anything. It's never a one-trick pony. It's never just one thing. But historically or statistically, it appears to be that the antibodies, in particular the TPO ones, the thyroperoxidase, they're the ones that creep up. And everything else is trying to madly, because it's negative feedback. Like the conductor's madly saying, oh, we got a queue here. You guys are just going to have to wait. And you don't really see it until you got this whole, you know, like think of the Arc de Triomphe on a bad day. All the hormones are then like, oh, well, I'm done, you know. And that's by the time that happens, the TSH is gone.
Dr Miranda Myles.
So the TSH is your brain's communicator with your thyroid, okay? And nothing irks me more than a patient that's come in and has been told their thyroid is fine, you know, it's all been tested, it's all fine, it must be in your head, here, have this antidepressant type of picture, type of scenario, which happens a lot. Because TSH is coming from the brain, it's telling your thyroid what to do. So it is your brain's communication with your thyroid. Now, TSH then should be going up and down. We should see it going up and down all the time because it's regulating the T3 and T4. So your brain is saying, all right, we're going to make more TSH to tell the thyroid to make more T3 and T4 if they are low. Yeah. So if the T4 is low or the T3 is low, that sends a message back to your brain, make more TSH to tell the thyroid to make more of those. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a feedback mechanism. So then we make T4 The thyroid makes T4, and I've seen different statistics with this. So I've seen anywhere between 80 to 93% of our total thyroid hormone pool is as T4.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of go with the 93% number. So of all of our thyroid hormones that we make, 93% is as T4.
Mm-hmm.
Then we make about 7% T3 from the thyroid.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so only 7% as T3, and then T4 converts to T3, and that process happens in the liver. Okay, so our thyroid itself makes 93% T4, 7% T3, T3 being the active thyroid hormone, and then to get more T3, the conversion of T4 to T3 happens at the liver level. So the liver is so important in all of this, liver function and what liver is doing, because like the T4 kind of arrives at the liver, and the liver goes, right, well, we're going to convert this to T3, or are we going to convert this T4 to reverse T3, right?
Yes.
So we make a little bit of reverse T3 all the time, and it's low level, and our body just goes, yep, cool, we can deal with that. But then in particular conditions, we make too much reverse T3. It starts to go too high. So for some reason, the liver's going, right, well, we have this T4. I don't want it converting to T3. I'm going to convert it to reverse T3. Why are we doing that? What's happening there? And suddenly reverse T3 goes up too high. And if there's too much reverse T3 compared with T3, then we get a suppression of the T3 activity. It's almost like the reverse T3 floods the T3 receptors on the cells and stops the T3 from being able to activate those cells. So then we have all of this reverse T3, and we need to figure out why, and that can be high or low cortisol, so high or low stress, or high stress or adrenal exhaustion. It can be low iron. It can be other chronic inflammatory conditions. It can be weird fad diets. So there's all of these reasons why that the liver goes, all right, well, we're going to make more reverse T3. It can also be liver dysfunction. Fatty liver, you and I have talked about fatty liver before. You know, fatty liver can get in the way, or some sort of other liver issue that's driving that reverse T3.
And do you have a good example of someone who had high reverse T3 with a cause that we wouldn't think of?
The really big examples is when there's some sort of non-alcoholic fatty liver issue. And that's happened now. I've got several patients where that's been the case. The TSH, T3, T4, like perfect, just looks so good, no thyroid antibodies, and then this reverse T3 is just through the roof. I've got one at the moment, hers is at 880.
Wow.
And it's just like, okay, what is going on here? So this is not a thyroid issue.
No.
There's no thyroid issue here at all. The thyroid is fine. The thyroid's doing exactly what it should be doing, but the T4 has arrived at the liver, and the liver's gone, nah, I'm going to make a whole lot of this, whole lot of this reverse T3. And that one at the moment, she is another fatty liver issue. And of course, we think about fatty liver as being associated with alcohol. She doesn't drink, and she does have a lot of soft drink though. So that's been the driver there, a non-alcoholic fatty liver. It's a soft drink issue, and well, that's what I'm seeing so far. And that's what's now, because obviously some of those revolting sweeteners are metabolized in the same way that alcohol is by the liver.
Yeah.
So the liver's metabolizing these horrible sugars, and it's causing a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. What we have seen, it was actually her GP who palpated and felt that her liver was quite enlarged. And that's when we went, okay, her liver enzymes were starting to creep up. So they weren't anything scary. They weren't in the 200, 300, 400s. They were just sitting slightly above. But straight away for me, that's like, something's happening. Now, I will look at liver enzymes if they're even getting close to their top end of, so ALP, for example, should be less than 35. If it's sitting at 30, I'm starting to go, something's happening here. I want it below. I want them right down in the less than 20 sort of areas.
Definitely. Whereas, see, I've got a case where the TSH is low, out of range. It's crept up into range. The T3 and the T4, they're within range. They're not like, terribly out of range. And the antibodies are fine. So see, then we've got the reverse issue, don't we? And there's no symptoms of overactive thyroid.
Exactly. So this is where we sort of look at it and go, well, are we treating numbers or are we treating the patient that's sitting in front of us? And I think even when we get a result, a thyroid result, so taking the example that I had where it was like, yeah, bam, the antibodies are through the roof. It's like, okay, does she experience symptoms that are reflective of that? Well, yes, she had an early pregnancy loss. Okay, so we need to treat the numbers. But I have another patient that has thyroid antibodies very, very similar through the roof, and there's just nothing to say. There's nothing.
Symptom-wise.
Symptom-wise, there's nothing there. And so it's with her, we're sort of going, well, I suppose the only symptom really with her is this constant fatigue. And we were trying to get to the bottom of this constant fatigue. Now, with that patient particularly, her antibodies are through the roof. So and she has Mirena in. So we've gone down there. Is it EBV? Is it there's some sort of autoimmune, some sort of other immune situation going on? And there's just nothing. So we've actually gone, all right, is it Mirena? Are you having an immune response to Mirena? So that's our next step. We're taking Mirena out. So whilst we're treating the numbers in a way, I think there's still that exhaustion that's sitting there that we need to get to the bottom of. So this is worth doing. But if there's really no pathology, like nothing to say, that could be where they just sit.
Where do you like to see TSH? Is it the 2 or is it more the 2.5 that you're at with the TSH at the moment?
I like it 0.5 to 1.5.
Okay.
That's where I like it sitting.
Yep.
Yeah, I like it sitting in that sort of bracket. For pregnancy, definitely as long as it's under 2.5 before they go into a pregnancy. But again, I like it sitting 0.5 to 1.5.
Yeah.
T4, I like at the upper end of the range. So depending on what that range is, some of the labs are up to 23. So I like it sitting sort of around 18, 19.
Yeah.
If it's some of the other labs are 20, so I kind of go 16, 17, somewhere around there.
Okay.
But effectively, if T4 is below 14, in an industrialized society with iodized salt, we should not have T4 sitting below 14. It should be well above 14. Otherwise, something is going on there. T3, I like above 4.8.
Yeah, okay.
So, anywhere above 4.8. Onwards and upwards from there.
And then reverse T3? Under
300. Less than 300. And then that puts where I really want that T3 to reverse T3 ratio is because the range for that is 1.2 to 2.2. I like it sitting at 2.
Yeah, okay.
In that ratio.
Natalie K. Douglas agrees and says she doesn't have any numbers that she works with anymore. She treats the symptoms and looks at patterns.
Primary hypothyroidism is when we've got an elevated TSH with a low T4, and then subclinical hypothyroidism is an elevated TSH but a normal T4. And when I say normal, from a diagnostic criteria perspective, we're talking about the standard reference ranges, not necessarily what we would consider optimal versus not.
And subclinical?
So subclinical is when there's an elevated TSH, but the T4 is still normal.
What are the dangers of that subclinical hypothyroidism?
I think one thing to consider here is that an elevated TSH is really not something we want to have over the long term because it is stimulating the growth of the gland, and we don't want large amounts of growth stimulation to that gland because it's increasing the risk of thyroid nodules and thyroid cancers. Plus, it's also a source of extra oxidative stress.
All 3 practitioners agree that stress is the major trigger for the thyroid conditions that they treat. Alexandra Brewster.
Retirement's been the best thing for my thyroid.
And what was the driver for you?
Stress, running a business.
Yeah.
Bass, tax.
As for testing, she orders thyroid function tests, including antibodies and vitamin D.
Other tests are your heavy metals and Dutch, if I suspect they've got a hormone involvement. Having said that, Tony, let me say this. I don't say here's a fistful of requests that's going to cost you $1,500. We take our time and we see what works. First of all, we do the pathology because it's Australian and it's easy.
Yeah.
So that's what I do with hypo. Hypo, it's pretty much the same. And also, if I suspect a goiter, when you have the double band on your neck, that's a really good sign of a subclinical goiter. You know when people have that double crease?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, a lot of the Indian ladies have it. Ironically, fenugreek's a goitrogen. Fenugreek's a goitrogen, which is the main ingredient in curry.
Yes.
But I think they also got a genetic predisposition, of course. You can't dodge your genes. Apple never falls far from the tree and all that stuff.
If you have a suspicion of hypothyroidism, let's say with autoimmunity, what do you go ahead and suggest?
If I think anybody has anything thyroid vaguely, I'm one of those naturopaths. It's strict gluten-free.
Yeah.
Because gluten in every instance will cause an autoimmune reaction. In Australia, you know how you say, people say, oh, but I'm all right when I'm in Europe.
Yes.
It's because we spray Roundup on all our fields up here.
Yeah.
You know, we spray Roundup and then it goes into the gut and kills our microbiome. So always strict gluten-free until we ascertain there is no autoimmune involvement. If there is, remain on gluten-free. If not, unusual, they get organic rye or wheat only with a good proportion of protein and colour as well. So that's my diet because I try and keep it simple.
Yeah.
Until they feel better. We avoid the goitrogens for now. And I know this is really controversial, but to me, in all my years of practice, it's always worked.
Yeah.
So that's soy, especially processed. And now let's just think about this. Let's go back to the blue zones. The Okinawans eat tempeh and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Most of us, looking at us, we're not Japanese.
No.
We don't have the genetics.
No, yeah.
Think about that. If your great-great-great-grandmother times 8 doesn't recognise it, we probably shouldn't be eating it. Our great-great-grannies by 8 didn't recognise it. So if I do have Asian type patients, we have another conversation about soy. About the natural stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Raw goitrogenic vegetables, I try and stay away for them as well. So we so the broccolis and kales and stuff. Sure, you can eat them, but they must be cooked.
Yeah.
Lightly cooked. It doesn't take a lot to destroy the goitrogens. And, of course, preservatives like MSG, the glutamates and stuff, the thyroid hates them.
Some of her out-of-the-box supplements include phosphatidylserine and choline, and she always checks in on iron.
Iron is a deal breaker for thyroid. When we have inflammation, our body sequesters iron away because there is some anecdotal evidence that a lot of infections and stuff, all the bacteria will use iron as their food source. So I think this is me being conjecting, is that a word? Conjecture only. I do think that's one of the reasons we sequester iron away when we're inflamed or infected. Vitamin E and vitamin C as well. I tell them to turn their Wi-Fi off at night. In my house, it's the last one that goes to bed that turns the Wi-Fi off.
Yes.
Living where I do amongst the Conway National Park, I'm so lucky I do not see any towers. I am so blessed.
Yes, you are.
You know, though unit livers, it's hard. Have a look on all the units in Brisbane. They're all stuck on the side, those big, ugly boxes. Imagine if we turned them off at night. Sorry. Just amused myself.
There'd be hell to pay.
Yeah. All the gamers. It's really hard when you get a runner or a CrossFitter, or maybe you can't use that word, like one who's really intensive exercise, because gentle, mindful exercise, forest bathe is best. We haven't even talked about estrogen. As I said, too much estrogen. Of course, we need it, but too much estrogen is a bit thyrotoxic. So if they are on the OCP or if they're older, HRT, I try and reevaluate that, and if I can work with the doctor, I love to. But again, you know, a lot of fertility patients don't worry because they're off contraception as well. Getting rid of the fluoride, and of course, we've got to address the gut, and we've done that with the diet because all autoimmune disease, or no, we better not say all, 80% of autoimmune disease begins in the gut.
All 3 practitioners do not support heroic doses of iodine in their patients.
I sit moderate.
Yeah.
I am a moderate. There are cases where I will push it, absolutely. And I have done that before. I've done that many, many times. But generally speaking, I sit moderate and then go up if we're really not getting anywhere.
Dr Miranda Myles.
And just on the treatments, are there any, obviously we'd be looking at deficiencies, we're looking at cofactors, making sure everyone's got the foundational nutrients they need for thyroid hormone production.
Yeah.
Is there anything kind of out of the box that you're using or looking at, or dosage-wise, what you consider in these presentations, particularly underactive thyroid?
I always remember vitamin A. I think people get very, very scared off vitamin A.
Yeah.
You need vitamin A to be transporting the thyroid hormones around your body. And we get so scared about vitamin A. I'm really happy to dose very, very high on vitamin A. That's one that I'm really comfortable with because the toxicity levels are not where we're told they sit. You know, even in pregnant women, they're told no more than 2,500 international. Nothing happens at 2,500 international units. Nothing happens at that level. You know, it's one of those things that I'm happy to push vitamin A over iodine. So that's a big thing to remember.
Before we move on from vitamin A, what's the dosing? You say you're happy to go high. What's high for you?
So I will easily go to 10,000.
Okay, yeah.
But there's some research that says nothing happens until you're at 75,000.
Wow.
Now, I'm not going to push up there. I'm not going to go up there because that simply because it freaks too many people out. It scares too many people if you start going over and above 10,000. Even 7,500 can be a bit scary for some people, but 10,000, so I'm talking international units here, not micrograms. I'm talking international units. So that 10,000 international units I'm comfortable with.
Now I'll let you go on to selenium after interrupting you.
Selenium is the other one that I'm really comfortable to push, given that we get 8,000 micrograms of selenium for 10 Brazil nuts, that sort of picture. Then I'm quite happy to push. Japanese children get easily 1,000 micrograms of selenium in their diet. So we go really gentle with selenium. Do you remember the days when we were only allowed 26.5 micrograms? Do you remember those days? Man, did nothing. Seriously. At least we're sitting at 150 micrograms nowadays. But I will certainly go, particularly again if there's thyroid antibodies, that 400 micrograms of selenium is baseline. And that's a lot of the functional medicine gurus in America are sort of saying you need a minimum of 400 micrograms of selenium and then really high dose myo-inositol, 6 grams of myo-inositol to bring those antibodies down.
Yeah.
But remember, it takes, when we're doing the antibodies, it's very, very important to make it clear to the patient that it's 3 months minimum before we'll even start to see the antibodies move. That doesn't mean in 3 months' time your antibodies will be normal. No. That means in 3 months' time, if you've got an antibody sitting at 1,300, you might have started to move it a tiny bit. But it may not even be registering yet, because remember, if the lab is saying the antibody is more than 1,300, then we don't know what its actual level is. And so in those cases with patients where the antibody is over 1,300, I won't retest for a good 6 to 12 months because I want them to see some sort of outcome. Because otherwise, if you do it too soon and it hasn't changed enough, the patient gets disheartened.
In the next episode of Between Clinical Minds, we continue the conversation, this time on how thyroid dysfunction impacts fertility. We talk to naturopaths Belinda Kirkpatrick and Natalie Pickering, and again to functional medicine practitioner Alexandra Brewster. Thank you for listening. We hope this podcast engaged and empowered you. And thank you to all of our experts. You can read more information on each of them on our website, bioconceptsengage.com.au. If you enjoyed this episode of Between Clinical Minds, please refer a friend and share the love. To continue the conversation, you can contact us at bioconceptsengage.com.au, where community is more than a concept.